For nearly 50 years, investigators did not give up in their pursuit to identify the man responsible for these murders.
We've identified a serial killer.
This man was the kind of the poster boy for a sexual predator.
It is a case that haunted Alberta for nearly 50 years. A string of young women murdered in the late 70s with no answers for decades.
And now a major cold case breakthrough has led to the unmasking of a suspected serial killer. And Crime Beat producer Nancy Hixt joins us with the chilling details from their new episode and why some believe more victims may still be out there. Nancy, good to have you back with us here on TMS. And this case goes back almost 5 decades, with families waiting years for answers. When you first began investigating, did you have any idea that it would point to a suspected serial killer?
Well, this case was complicated for investigators. Back in 1976, when Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen were first killed, their deaths were deemed an accidental overdose, really. It was undetermined. So the second 2 homicides of Melissa Rahoric and Barbara McLean, those 2 were linked right away, and DNA confirmed that those 2 were linked in 2003. But they still didn't know who the killer was, and it was nearly 50 years later when Calgary police used investigative genetic genealogy to identify the possible killer after 11 weeks of work.
Wow. All right. So, Nancy, you spoke with the killer's own son, who believes his father may be connected to even more unsolved murders. What can you tell us about the information he provided to police?
One of the priorities when police identified who Gary Sreri was, the man who was responsible for these homicides, they wanted to speak to the people who knew him best, and that included his family. When I got a chance to speak with his son, he was going through some of the history. His father was on the run when he was a child, so he had sent him letters when they were growing up, and in those letters he had different aliases. He had used fake names, and so he shared that with police, but he also shared that with me. And in the middle of those conversations were some very jaw-dropping moments for me, because one of the names that Gary Sreri used is the name the killer used in a high-profile, unsolved historical homicide case in Alberta that remains unsolved, and that is the murder of Kelly Cook. She was kidnapped and murdered in 1981. And I will tell you, in this show, there's some shocking information and details that the killer's son reveals as to why he believes his biological father was responsible for that homicide as well. I can tell you the RCMP are adamant that he is not involved. So there is quite a debate there, but I will say, coincidentally, the killer, Gary Sreri, lived in the small town where Kelly Cook also lived and was kidnapped from and murdered.
So Nancy, where does this leave us now? Is there a belief that this case is truly closed, or is there perhaps still more to uncover?
No, they're looking at cases in BC right now. He lived in BC for quite some time. He spent a lot of time in the U.S., in Alberta, in BC, so there's a lot of speculation that he could be responsible for other homicides. And there was also a psychological profile that was done on him, and officials do believe that he committed other crimes that he got away with. You have to remember also that this killer started as a serial rapist in California in the 70s. So there's quite a few victims who survived. We know there's at least 4 victims who were killed, and so there is a lot of investigating still to do in this case.
All right, Nancy Hixt. Nancy, good to see you this morning, and thank you so much for this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.